During the will reading, my rich grandfather gave everybody loads of cash. I received just 50, not 50 grand, not a token payment. Simply 2 fresh notes pushed over the desk like something forgotten. My father grinned, the sort of grin that means, I knew this already. My brother chuckled, not bothering to cover it. Somebody whispered, makes sense. I remained silent. I simply looked at the cash in my palms, sensing the space tighten surrounding me. Since my grandfather had always been careful, not with work, not with folks. And this seemed planned. When I angled the notes beneath the bright office lighting, I saw something odd. A small marking, nearly hidden, nearly worthless. But my grandfather had once mentioned, if you need to bury the reality, place it where nobody thinks to search. An hour afterward, I entered inside a peaceful bank room, pushing those $50 over the counter. The worker glanced down at the cash, and suddenly, he stopped. My name is Hazel, and in my household I was always the one folks expected little from. Not since I was reckless, not since I was a loser, but since I was reserved. While my brother Ethan discovered early how to speak strongly, claim room, and make every talk into an opening, I discovered how to hang back and watch. While my parents applauded his drive, his boldness, his tomorrow, they labeled me with gentler terms. Hazel is kind. Hazel is simple. Hazel doesn't want much. What they actually meant was, Hazel won't make problems. My grandfather, William, was the single one who appeared to see the contrast. To the planet he was a rich man, a guy who made an empire from nearly zero. Folks fixed their posture when he walked into a space. Bankers chuckled a bit too hard at his humor. Leaders answered his messages within seconds. But to me, he was simply Grandpa Will, the guy who took his coffee dark. Who disliked pointless sound? Who thought silence revealed you more about a soul than speech ever might? When his condition began declining, the household suddenly got very active. Everybody dropped by, just not for much. My father would appear in a fitted outfit, glance his timepiece twice, and mention, Dad, I simply needed to check how you're feeling. I've got a session. My mother carried bouquets that remained ignored in a container. Ethan showed once, remained near the entrance and mentioned, Stay tough, Grandpa. You're powerful. Then they departed. And the space constantly seemed lonelier following. I remained. Not since I believed it would gain me something. Not since I was wishing for thanks. I remained since somebody needed to. I fixed his cushions when his breathing grew weak. I spoke the paper out clearly when his vision faded. I heard the identical tales again and again without stopping him. Even when I already understood the conclusion, one evening, as daylight came, lightly through the clinic curtains, he stretched out and grabbed my palm. His hold was delicate, but deliberate. Notice that? He whispered gently. Notice what? I breathed. The stillness, he mentioned. Most folks are scared of it. He watched me then, truly watched me as if he were recording my appearance. You're not scared. He went on. That's why you're still present. I gulped deeply. Obviously I am. He grinned slightly. No, you're scared of being unseen. That's separate. I couldn't figure what to respond to that. Another moment, deep at dark, when the devices buzzed constantly, and the planet seemed distant away, he mentioned something that remained with me. Wealth doesn't reveal who folks are, he whispered. It simply pulls the cover quicker. I chuckled gently. You seem like you're arranging something. His look sparked with something I couldn't entirely grasp. Perhaps I am, he answered. I believed it was simply the treatment speaking. I couldn't know he was already choosing who I was going to turn into. When he died, he managed it silently. No emotional final speech. No extended farewells. Simply a slow letting of my palm. And then emptiness. I recall remaining there following, unable to shift. Considering one single idea again and again. Now I truly am isolated. Since the one soul who noticed me, who never required me to be stronger, harder, or changed, was finished. And I had no clue that even in passing, my grandfather was still observing. The burial was precisely what my grandfather would have preferred. Plain, managed, no pointless talks. Dark outfits filled the little church. Shined footwear placed cleanly along the row. Pale blooms organized with exact care. Everything appeared costly. Everything appeared respectful. And yet none of it seemed genuine. I remained near the rear, palms clasped firmly in front of me, observing my household engage like performers who had practiced their parts too often. My father talked in a soft, calm tone, gripping palms, bowing seriously. My mother touched her face at thoughtfully picked times. Ethan shifted through the gathering with assurance, receiving sympathy as if they were his to take. Nobody remained next to me. Nobody wondered if I was fine. They couldn't need to. In this household, that question was never wondered. Unless there was something to collect from the reply. I caught murmurs floating through the space. Gentle but cutting. So how much do you believe he gave? I caught the property itself is worth a treasure. Ethan's likely covered for years. Each phrase hit like a tiny, silent wound. I promised myself not to hear. I promised myself this wasn't the moment. But sadness makes you tender in methods you don't assume. Every sound seemed stronger, every look thicker. At one moment, I met my father's gaze from over the space. For a beat, I believed he might walk over. Mention something. Whatever. Rather, he offered me a quick nod and looked back to a talk about arrangements. Attorney will reach us next period. He mentioned to somebody next to him. We'll manage the matters. We, as if I wasn't remaining right here. Following the ceremony, folks started to exit rapidly. There were no staying hugs, no remembered stories shared with feeling. Simply polite farewells and schemes already building for what followed next. Wealth has a method of managing that. It draws folks ahead, never allowing them remain too much in the history. At the graveyard, while the box was dropped into the earth, I sensed something within me crack open. This was it. The finish of the one connection in my world that had never seemed limited. I needed to yell. I needed to insist that somebody see how wrong this seemed. Rather, I remained there in stillness, since stillness was what I had constantly been skilled at. Afterward that night, I was the one who came back to my grandfather's aged home. Not my parents. Not Ethan, me. The location smelled lightly of powder and aged pages. I shifted slowly from space to space, holding known items like they might vanish if I couldn't. His timepiece on the table. The seat by the glass where he often remained in the evenings. The workspace where he saved his written notes, figures marked in firm, careful marks. I dropped down in that seat and eventually permitted myself to weep. Not strongly, not wildly. Simply enough to allow the pain release. A few mornings afterward, an envelope came in the delivery, heavy paper, proper writing. Reading of the final will and instructions of William Carter. The location was a legal room downtown. The time was marked cleanly in dark pen. My palms shook as I carried it. I couldn't assume much. I had prepared myself not to. Still, a tiny, risky idea entered in before I could halt it. Perhaps he recalled. I creased the note thoughtfully and placed it aside, unaware that by the moment I entered into that room, everything I trusted about my spot in that household was about to be challenged openly. The legal room was chillier than I assumed. Not in heat, in sensation. Cleaned timber, clouded panes, hide seats organized with exact balance. Like the space itself was showing us who fit and who couldn't. I came a few seconds ahead and grabbed the chair furthest from the front of the desk, naturally making myself tiny. One by one my household marched in. My father, Richard, entered straight to the beginning and dropped down as if the chair had been ready for him. My mother trailed. Mouth pushed into a narrow mark. Ethan entered in final, calm, assured, already grinning like he understood how this would finish. Nobody welcomed me. Nobody wondered how I was managing. The attorney, Daniel Ross, cleared his voice and lifted the packet in front of him. We are present to speak the final will and instructions of William Carter. He mentioned steadily. My pulse started to beat. The initial name was my father's. Richard Carter, Daniel spoke. A complete gift of $5 million. My father rested back in his chair, happiness showing across his appearance before he covered it with a serious nod. My mother got $3 million. She released a wind she'd been keeping and stretched for my father's palm. Then Ethan, $2 million, he couldn't even attempt to cover his smile. He looked in my path, lifted his face and shaped. Said so, I focused down at my palms. Don't assume anything, I told myself. You understood this. Daniel stopped, flipping the sheet. And Hazel Carter, the space went silent. For Hazel Carter, the amount of $50. For a beat I believed I'd heard wrong. 50. Not 50 grand. Not a symbol action matched with some emotional item. Simply 50. A chuckle split the stillness. Ethan's. Wow. He mentioned, moving his skull. That's fitting. Somebody else laughed. I couldn't glance up to notice who. My father grinned, not meanly, not clearly, but with the silent happiness of somebody whose extended belief had simply been proven. This shows something. He mentioned casually. Dad understood who was sensible and who wasn't. My mother dodged my face completely. I sensed warmth climb to my appearance, then empty away, creating something icy and empty behind. I held for the attorney to mention more, some reason, some note, some closing words. But Daniel simply pushed 2 notes over the desk toward me. Please mark here, he mentioned, his voice flat, businesslike. I lifted up the cash. It seemed thicker than it ought to. The space hummed gently around me, murmurs. Moving seats, the silent comfort of folks who had received precisely what they arrived for. Nobody talked to me. Nobody wondered if I was fine. I couldn't weep. I couldn't fight. I couldn't protect myself. I simply focused at the notes in my palms, since my grandfather had never been sloppy. And when I angled the cash lightly beneath the ceiling lighting, I noticed it, a small marking. So light it might have been an error. Except I understood better. I creased the notes thoughtfully, tucked them into my bag, and rose up. I believe we're finished here. I mentioned silently. No one halted. Me. As I entered out of the room, I caught Ethan chuckle again behind me. But for the initial moment, something within me wasn't splitting. It was rising up. I couldn't go back right away. I remained in my vehicle. In the garage space under the legal room, motor off, palms still gripped firmly around my bag. My image focused back at me from the front glass, pale, tight, but oddly concentrated. $50. I drew the notes out again, flattening them thoughtfully on my legs. Most folks would have pushed them into a holder and ignored about them, or ripped them up in fury, or chuckled it off acting. It couldn't sting. But my grandfather had shown me to glance nearer. Facts. He often mentioned, touching the edge of his journal. That's where the reality stays. It was strange. I angled the notes beneath the weak garage lighting. There it was again, a small mark, nearly like a mark near the number O. Not chance, not unplanned. One marking on the initial note, another on the following, my beat. Rose. I verified the figures. On one note, 3 numbers were lightly marked. On the other, 2 more placed so carefully they needed to indicate something. This wasn't a spot. It wasn't wear and damage. Somebody had managed this on intent. He managed this. I believed suddenly, the thought sent a shake through me. My grandfather had constantly been exact. He disliked creating things incomplete. Disliked open threads. If he needed to give me 0, he couldn't have dealt with $50 at all. Unless the cash wasn't the gift, unless it was the answer, I traveled over town without truly considering about it. My palms firm on the driving circle. The location arrived to me naturally. Drawn from recall like extended hidden record, the aged bank, the one my grandfather had worked for years, the one he relied when he relied nobody else. The hall was silent when I entered in. Stone grounds, gentle brightness, the scent of sheets and shine. It seemed like walking into a separate planet, one where tones remained soft and truths remained hidden. I walked the beginning counter. My pulse beating. I need to talk with the office worker, I mentioned, attempting to maintain my tone calm. It's about my grandfather, William Carter. The worker's look shifted quickly. 1 beat, please. A few seconds afterward, I was brought into a closed room. The guy behind the counter rose as I walked. Silver locks, cutting look, steady, businesslike stance. "I'm Mr. Thompson," he mentioned. "How can I assist you, Ms. Carter?" I couldn't lose moment. I set the 2 notes on his counter and pushed them toward him. "These were given to me and my grandfather's instructions," I mentioned. "And I believe he labeled them." Mr. Thompson scowled lightly, then lifted up the cash. At initial he appeared tired, courteous, patient. Then his look tightened. He rested nearer, flipped the notes, verified the number rows, and then he halted, shifting. The shade emptied. From his appearance so rapidly it shocked me. "Where did you receive these?" he wondered, his tone suddenly thoughtful. "You already understand," I answered. "From William Carter." He couldn't reply right away. "Rather." He rose up, entered to the entrance, and silently secured it. Then he came back to his seat and watched at me with something I couldn't assumed, regard. "These labels," he mentioned carefully, "are not a chance." My wind stopped. "They're a check pattern," he went on. "And if I'm correct, you're the single soul who might have carried them here." I seemed light. "What does that indicate?" I breathed. Mr. Thompson creased his palms on the counter. "It indicates," he mentioned, "your grandfather gave something beyond the instructions, something no one else was supposed to reach." The space seemed suddenly too tight, and the cash, I wondered. He looked at the notes one more moment. "The cash," he mentioned silently, "was simply the offer." My grandfather's tone rang in my thoughts. "If you need to bury the reality, place it where nobody thinks to glance." And for the initial moment since the instructions reading, I grasped the true gift couldn't been stated in that icy room. It had been set straight into my palms. Mr. Thompson couldn't hurry me. He remained back in his seat, examining my appearance, the method somebody does when they're choosing how much reality another soul can manage at once. "Before we move any deeper," he mentioned thoughtfully, "I need to check your name." I agreed, palms shaking lightly as I offered over my card. He studied it, entered something into his machine, then stopped when the display answered. His mouth firmed nearly barely. "It's precisely as he mentioned," he said. "As who mentioned?" I wondered. "Your grandfather." My pulse started to speed. Mr. Thompson rose and entered toward a big metal box placed into the surface behind him. He lifted it with a code, then another number, shifting with the skilled ease of somebody who had managed this before but not regularly. "There's a closed storage container here," he shared, "listed only to William Carter. It lives beyond the instructions, beyond court. Totally apart." My voice went empty. Why wasn't somebody else informed about it? He watched at me then, his look firm. "Because your grandfather told us not to inform somebody," he mentioned. "Unless they arrived with evidence." He set the 2 notes next to a paper on his counter. "These labels," he went on, "are part of a check plan he built himself. He trusted figures reveal the reality if you understand how to study them." That seemed precisely like him. I trailed Mr. Thompson down a silent hallway, the atmosphere getting chillier with every move. We halted in front of a thick entrance, and he typed a number I couldn't know. The entrance lifted with a gentle sound. Inside was a little space covered with protected containers. He released one and moved it open. I wasn't ready for what I noticed. Cleanly placed yellow blocks caught the brightness. Files marked with business titles I knew. Quickly. Deal papers, bonds, records. I sensed my legs soften. "This," I breathed. "This is roughly $32 million. Mr. Thompson completed steadily. Carefully, I hid my lips. Drops clouding my sight. But it wasn't the cash that made my body hurt. It was the packet resting on top of everything else. Simple, cream-shaded. My title written in my grandfather's known writing. Hazel. My palms trembled as I lifted it up. "He gave that clearly for you," Mr. Thompson mentioned gently. "We were told not to lift it, always." I agreed, hardly able to wind. We came back to the room, and once I was sitting, I eventually lifted the packet. The sheet within was creased thoughtfully, as if he'd grabbed his moment. As if he understood I would. My dear Hazel, if you're studying this, it indicates you noticed what others couldn't. That already reveals me I was correct. Drops moved down my face before I could halt them. I offered you $50. Not since that's what you earned. But since I required you to notice the reality with your personal look. Wealth doesn't shift folks. It simply pulls the reasons. I might catch his tone in my skull. Steady and sure. I needed you to observe who grinned, who chuckled, who remained silent when you were reduced. Those responses count more than any talk. At a burial. My body firmed painfully. You were the single one who remained when there was zero to collect. You couldn't wonder. You couldn't force. You couldn't act. That is why I rely you. I pushed the note to my body. My frame trembling. He had noticed everything. The cash in that container is not a prize. It is a duty. Shield yourself with it. Create a world that doesn't need you to plead for regard. And when they arrive, and they will recall this. Care that relies on cash was never care to start with. I cleaned my face and studied the closing mark. Don't make yourself tiny again. Grandpa, the stillness that trailed seemed holy. Mr. Thompson cleared his voice softly. Your grandfather also gave legal directions. He mentioned, if you pick to move forward, we can build a fund quickly hidden, shielded. No one can reach it without your approval. I grabbed a long wind outside that room. My household was likely enjoying, figuring, arranging. They believed the tale had already finished. But as I creased the note thoughtfully and set it back into the packet, I understood. Something. This wasn't the finish. It was the beat everything truly started. And the following moment my household watched at me. They couldn't be noticing the silent one anymore. They couldn't offer me much moment. 3 mornings. That's all it grabbed for the reality to escape. I was still handling everything. Still replaying my grandfather's note in my skull when my device began. Buzzing non-stop. Messages I skipped. Texts I couldn't lift. Missed recordings building. Up like alert marks. I understood who it was. I simply couldn't assume them to appear in Seoul. It was early night when the knock arrived. Not courteous. Not unsure. Cutting and rushed. Like the entrance belonged them something. I glanced through the opening. My father. My mother. And Ethan. All remaining there with skilled looks. Worry mixed with assumption. I grabbed a gentle wind and lifted the entrance. Hazel. My mother mentioned quickly. Moving. Ahead. We need to speak. They entered in without holding for an offer. My father looked. Around my place. Looked studying the seats. The racks. The silent room like he was. Hunting for evidence. You maintained this location very plain. He mentioned. Curious. I mentioned 0. Ethan rested against the surface. Arms folded. Grinning. So Grandpa couldn't believe you required improvements, huh? I eventually talked. Why are you here? My father couldn't pause. We understand about the record, he mentioned directly. The one you couldn't mention. The atmosphere firmed. I don't understand what you're discussing. I answered steadily. He laughed. Don't mock us. Somebody at the bank spoke. We understand it's over 30 million. My mother stretched for my shoulder. I moved back. Dear, she mentioned gently. This doesn't need to be messy. We're household. Ethan chuckled. Yeah, household. That thing you ignored about the moment. You received rich. Something cracked. Not strongly, but sharply. You chuckled at me. I mentioned that. The instructions reading. Do you recall that stillness? I went on. My tone calm but cutting. When? I was offered $50. Did any of you rise up for me? Did somebody mention it was wrong? My father scowled. That's not the issue. It is, I mentioned. It's precisely the issue. Ethan turned his face. Fine. So what? Grandpa had his causes. He constantly preferred you anyway. My mother's face filled with drops. Hazel, please. You understand your brother has schemes, deals. This cash might assist all of us. There it is. I mentioned silently. My father's voice hardened. We're not wondering. We're informing you to manage the correct thing. Divide it. Maintain the peace. I sensed my palms tremble, but I couldn't allow it display. The correct thing, I said. Based on who? Based on connection, he yelled. I stretched into my sack and drew out a file. Based to the rules, I mentioned, setting it on the desk. They stopped. What's that? Ethan wondered. My grandfather's legal directions, I answered. The ones you couldn't understand about. I lifted the file and moved the papers toward them. This record is kept in fund. I went on. Apart from the instructions. Totally legal. Totally shielded. My father's appearance grew dark. You arranged this. No, I mentioned. He managed. My mother breathed. Hazel, don't manage this. I faced her. Face. I'm not managing anything. I'm respecting his desires. Ethan's tone became cutting. You believe you're superior than us now? No, I replied. I believe I'm finished being tinier. My father. Fixed. If you don't divide, we'll fight it. I agreed once. You can attempt, I mentioned. But there's a rule in the instructions. Any legal fight cancels your gift. The space went frozen. Ethan's grin disappeared. That's a lie. It was spoken out clearly, I mentioned. You were there. My father tightened his mouth. My mother glanced between us, worried. You couldn't, she breathed. I already am. I answered. They remained there for extended beat, understanding they'd judged wrong. Eventually my father shifted toward the entrance. You'll feel sorry this, he mentioned. Perhaps, but as the entrance shut behind them, the stillness that trailed couldn't seem hollow. It seemed like comfort. For the initial moment in my world I wasn't preparing for crash. I was holding my spot, and I understood without a question. This was the beat my grandfather had been building me for all through. The stillness following they departed couldn't finish that dark. It grew. At initial, it was gentle. My device halted buzzing. Team messages vanished. Offers I never assumed suddenly seemed clear by their missing. I was pulled from the household schedule without a sound. Special days went by. Celebrations arrived and passed. No texts. No reasons. Simply silent. I would be lying if I mentioned it couldn't hurt. Some darks, I remained isolated on my sofa, focusing at my device, thinking. If I had gone too much, if I had been too harsh, if picking myself had meant picking being alone. Since nobody truly discusses that piece. They inform you to create limits. They inform you to shield your calm. They don't inform you how hollow it can seem at initial. My parents couldn't ring. Ethan removed me on internet. I learned out by mistake when I attempted to view his page and it simply wasn't present anymore. I focused at the empty display longer than I ought to have. So, this was it. I had eventually mentioned no, and this was the cost. I centered on tasks, on pattern, on maintaining my world deliberately tiny and silent, simply the method my grandfather had existed despite everything he possessed. I couldn't purchase a larger spot. I couldn't shift my way of life. I couldn't share anything online. The cash remained precisely where it was shielded, ignored, hidden. Since the reality was, cash had never been the thing I desired. What I desired was protection. Periods afterward, I remained in a court hall, marking papers to complete the fund. The attorney shared everything thoughtfully, stressing terms like shield, approval, power. This guarantees no one can force you, she mentioned softly. Not now, not afterward. I agreed. Force had shaped my whole raising. This was the initial moment I sensed released from it. World shifted ahead in tiny, silent methods. I found Lily a season afterward. She was created on a wet Tuesday dawn, small and pink-skinned and flawless. When the helper set her in my hold, something within me changed itself totally. I glanced down at her and created a vow I couldn't mention out clearly. You will never need to gain care by making yourself less. My parents couldn't arrive to the clinic. They couldn't deliver bouquets. They couldn't wonder. And shockingly, that no longer broke me, since as I observed Lily rest against my body, her tiny hands wrapped around mine, I grasped something my grandfather had understood all through. Household isn't shaped by who appears when there's cash on the desk. It's shaped by who remains when there's zero to collect. Still, sometimes deep at dark, when the planet was silent, I thought if this gap was forever, if the entrance I had shut would ever lift again. I couldn't chase the reply. I had discovered that calm doesn't arrive from repairing folks who don't need to shift. It arrives from picking a separate tomorrow. And I was eventually ready to create one, even if I needed to manage it without them. World couldn't shift overnight. There was no wild win moment. No sorry trip. No sudden understanding from my household. What shifted was softer than that. Protected. I shifted slowly, deliberately. I handled with attorneys and helpers who replied to me and solely me. The fund my grandfather had built turned into a barrier I couldn't need to share, prove, or protect. For the initial moment, no one could trap me with shame. No one could scare me with household. No one could create me tinier for their ease. And I couldn't seem strong. I seemed shielded. As Lily developed, I created a world the method my grandfather had shown me plain on the outside, firm at the middle. I put carefully. I placed aside a tomorrow for her learning. I gave silently to groups. That helped ladies who required legal shield. Ladies who were informed, that's simply how household is, since I understood how risky that phrase could be. Sometimes folks wonder if I feel sorry. If I feel sorry not dividing, if I feel sorry stepping away, if I feel sorry being named icy or selfish. I don't, since regret arrives from moving against your personal reality. And for once, I couldn't. My grandfather couldn't give me $50. He couldn't even give me loads. He gave me truth. He revealed me who would chuckle when I was shamed, who would remain quiet, who would solely stretch for me when they required something. And more importantly, he revealed me who I was when I eventually halted, wondering for approval to live. The final thing he offered me wasn't cash. It was the strength to mention no, the power to remain isolated, and the release to create a household that would never mix care with power. When I glance at Lily now, chuckling without worry, developing without limits, I grasp the real gift, not riches, not payback, not approval, calm, and that was valued more than every buck he gave.